The house was quiet, too quiet for a mansion of its size. The sort of quiet that pressed against the walls and filled every hollow corner, as though silence itself had taken up residence there. Rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows, each drop rolling down in delicate streaks, while the occasional rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. James Whitmore sat alone in a grand leather chair, his posture straight but his heart burdened. He had built this home to showcase his success, to be a fortress of power, wealth, and control. Yet on nights like this, when shadows pooled in every corner and the storm whispered through the glass, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a tomb. James Whitmore, his name was known in every corner of the business world. He had clawed his way up from nothing, turning one risky investment after another into a towering empire. People admired him. Others envied him. Some even feared him. He had everything people usually craved. Wealth beyond measure, power to bend competitors, influence that reached far beyond boardrooms and banks. But at that moment, none of it mattered. His gaze was locked on the gold-plated credit card resting in his hand, a symbol of endless privilege, a card that opened doors others would never even see. Yet tonight, it wasn't a reminder of his wealth, but of his weakness. That card had been used in a way he could never have predicted, and the memory of it pressed against his chest with a strange ache he could not shake. James thought he had seen it all. Greed, betrayal, lies whispered behind boardroom doors, ambition that devoured friendships. But what his mate had chosen to buy with his card, that was something entirely different. Something that had shaken him in a way money, power, and betrayal never could. Before we go deeper into this powerful, heart-stirring story, allow me to pause. Dear listener, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the hidden battles people fight every single day, then please, like this video, share it and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Stories. Every click helps us spread stories that touch the soul and remind the world that compassion still exists. James Whitmore was known in New York's elite circles as a man who never bent, never gave away anything for free. His empire had been built brick by brick through ruthless decisions, bold risks, and a heart hardened by betrayal. Generosity was weakness in his book, and weakness was fatal in the world he lived in. Years ago, his wife had left him, taking half of his fortune with her. His only son had grown distant, refusing to speak to him, accusing him of valuing contracts over birthdays, meetings over memories, and power over love. The words still echoed in James's memory. You were never really a father. You were just a businessman who happened to live in our house. So James lived alone now, alone in a mansion designed for family gatherings that no longer happened. The wide staircases, the vast dining hall, the echoing music room, all of it stood silent, filled only by the soft footsteps of the small household staff who tended the empty palace. And among them was Maria. She was a maid in her late 30s, quiet, reserved, always moving through the house with a calm presence. She carried herself with dignity despite her modest position. Maria never complained, never asked for more, never broke rules. She worked tirelessly, her movements careful and precise, ensuring every surface gleamed. Every room carried a subtle scent of order. To the outside eye, Maria was simply another employee. But James noticed things. He always noticed, whether in a hostile takeover or within his own walls. He saw the way Maria's hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. He saw her shoes, worn thin and patched at the sides. He noticed how she wrapped leftovers neatly at the end of her shift, tucking them into her bag with quiet gratitude. Once, James had caught her lingering by the piano in the lounge. She thought she was alone. Her gaze rested on the polished keys, her eyes glistening as tears threatened to fall. But before they could, she wiped them away quickly, straightened her posture, and disappeared into her duties once more. There was something about Maria, a heaviness she carried like a cloak, though she never spoke of it. And James, who prided himself on his ability to dissect weaknesses, could not understand hers. The turning point came one evening. James returned home earlier than usual, his mind weary from yet another brutal meeting. As he walked into the kitchen, he found Maria there, clutching her phone tightly. Her face, usually calm, was twisted with fear. "Please," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "Please, just wait. I'm trying." I'm doing everything I can. Don't give up on him. Please. James froze. He shouldn't have been listening, but he couldn't look away. He caught fragments, words like hospital, treatment. Please wait. When she ended the call, she quickly wiped her face and turned, startled to see her employer standing in the doorway. She stammered, apologizing for being distracted, for letting her emotions slip into her work. James didn't respond immediately. Something stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity? Compassion? No, something stronger. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt compelled to do something, not for profit, not for business, but because it was human. The next morning, James placed his sleek black credit card on the counter. His tone was gruff, but his eyes betrayed something softer. Take it, he said firmly. Buy whatever you need. Maria froze, staring at the card as though it were a dangerous object. Sir, I can't. He hired the best doctors, specialists with reputations for working miracles. He covered every treatment cost without hesitation, every bill, every medication, every therapy. He set up a trust fund in Daniel's name, ensuring the boy would never again have to wonder if survival depended on money. When Maria tried to protest, shaking her head and saying, Sir, I can never repay you, James stopped her. You already have, he said quietly. He didn't explain further, but in his heart, he knew the truth. Maria had given him something no fortune could buy. She had reminded him of his humanity, of what it meant to feel, to love, to care again. Over the month that followed, James became a constant presence at the hospital. He read stories to Daniel, sometimes stumbling over the voices, but making the boy laugh all the same. He played simple tunes on the piano keys, and when Daniel pressed the notes with his tiny fingers, James applauded as though it were a grand performance at Carnegie Hall. Maria watched with quiet gratitude. The man she had once known only as her distant, intimidating employer was changing before her eyes. The walls around him were crumbling, and beneath them was a man who still had the capacity for kindness. But the transformation didn't end there. Inspired by Maria's sacrifice and Daniel's strength, James finally gathered the courage to reach out to his estranged son. Their first conversation was awkward, full of long silences and unspoken hurt. But James apologized, not as a CEO, not as a man defending himself, but as a father admitting he had failed. It wasn't easy. Healing rarely is. But slowly, he began to rebuild the bridge that had long since burned. In helping Maria and Daniel, James found the courage to seek forgiveness in his own life. The millionaire who once believed money was everything discovered something far greater, that the true wealth of life was not measured in dollars or stock options, but in the bonds of love, sacrifice, and compassion. And it had all begun with one small act, handing his mate a credit card. As this story draws to a close, I want to ask you, dear listener, something from the heart. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, love, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Your support helps us continue to bring stories that inspire and heal. And before we finish, here's a question we would love for you to answer in the comments. What does kindness mean to you? Because for James, kindness meant redemption. He would never forget the day Maria used his card. For most people, it was just a piece of plastic. For Maria, it was a lifeline. For Daniel, it was a chance to live. And for James, it was the beginning of becoming human again. Sometimes the smallest act of trust can change not just one life, but many. And sometimes the thing that breaks your heart is the very thing that puts it back together. James slid it closer. His voice allowed no argument, no questions, no excuses. Just do what you need to do. Tears filled her eyes as she picked it up with trembling hands. Her lips moved in a whisper. Thank you, sir. James expected her to spend it on survival, rent, groceries, maybe new clothes or shoes. Perhaps, in a moment of weakness, she might use it for herself, to escape her lowly life just for one fleeting night. Cynicism was his natural instinct, but when the statement arrived days later, his entire world shifted. There were no charges from luxury boutiques, no evidence of indulgence, No fine dining bills or designer handbags. The first charge was from a children's hospital in Brooklyn. Then came pharmacies, medical supply stores. Finally, a small floral shop. James's throat tightened as he stared at the list. He remembered her whispered phone call, the desperation in her voice. He grabbed his phone, demanded his driver take him to the hospital listed on the receipt. Hours later, he stood in the faintly antiseptic air of a modest hospital ward. Through the glass, he saw her. Maria sat beside a hospital bed where a little boy lay pale, but smiling faintly, clutching a stuffed toy. She held his hand, speaking softly, her eyes tired yet overflowing with love. James's chest tightened painfully. A nurse nearby noticed his frozen posture and approached. With gentle words, she explained. The boy's name was Daniel, 8 years old, Maria's son, diagnosed with leukemia. For months, Maria had been working double shifts, saving every penny, skipping meals, all in desperate hope of paying for his treatments. But it was never enough. She was drowning in debt, her life consumed by hospital visits and endless fear. And through it all, she had never once complained. James stood there motionless. For the first time in years, his heart cracked wide open. Maria hadn't used his card for herself. She had used it to keep her son alive. That night, James could not sleep. He paced the endless corridors of his mansion, his footsteps echoing against marble floors, every shadow reminding him of what he had seen. The image of Maria sitting by her son's bed refused to leave his mind. The boy's fragile hand clutching hers, the quiet strength in her eyes, the exhaustion carved deep into her face. These haunted him more than any failed deal or betrayal ever had. For years, James had hardened himself against the world. He thought wealth was armor and ruthlessness was strength. But standing in that hospital ward had undone him completely. He thought of his own son, how he used to hold James's hand the same way when he was small, back when bedtime stories mattered more than board meetings. But James had chosen empire over family, profit over presence. And in doing so, he had lost the one bond that could never be bought back. Now, seeing Maria and Daniel, the guilt tore into him. He realized how much he had thrown away, how little he had truly understood about love. The following day, James returned to the hospital. This time, he didn't linger outside the glass like a guilty bystander. He walked in. Maria looked up, startled. Fear flickered in her eyes, followed by embarrassment. She began to apologize, words tumbling quickly, thinking she had overstepped by using his card. But James raised his hand gently. "No," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Don't apologize." He moved closer to the bed. Daniel looked up at him with curious, weak eyes. James forced a smile, kneeling beside the boy. "Hello there. I'm James," he said. "Your mom tells me you like music." Daniel nodded faintly, his lips curving into a small smile. That simple exchange lit something inside James. It was as though he had stepped into a part of himself he had forgotten existed. He asked what the boy liked, what he dreamed of. He listened, not as a businessman, not as an employer, but as a man desperate to connect. Within days, James began bringing gifts. Books filled with stories, puzzles to keep Daniel entertained, and even a small portable keyboard when he learned the boy loved music. Daniel's face lit up with a joy that melted every barrier around James's heart. Maria stood by silently, tears brimming in her eyes as she watched her son smile, really smile, for the first time in weeks. But James didn't stop with gifts. He had the power, the wealth, the influence to do more. And for once, he wanted to use it not for himself, but for someone else.